We've gathered a panel tonight, a really excellent panel of industry experts. So I'm Stanley Chu. I'm one of the lawyers at Titan Law Corporation. We have a really wide practice. We do business immigration, personal immigration, refugee law, corporate law, franchise, real estate law, civil litigation, and wills and estate planning. So I think to date, we've worked with around close to 50 countries. Next slide, please. So this is our mission statement. You can go ahead and read it, but I'll paraphrase a little bit. One of the things that we've noticed with our clients immigrating to Canada is that immigration is a big step, but it's also not necessarily the biggest step. Building a life for yourself here is an even bigger step than going through the immigration process. So that's what Titan Law, TruSpect, and Prometheus, that's why we've come together to help our clients build that life for themselves after they've immigrated to Canada. So that's really our mission statement, and to provide you with high quality and a seamless experience. Thank you. So today we're primarily here to talk about the startup visa program. Business immigration is essentially a set of immigration programs, provincial and federal. So I'll go through the other three programs, and then I'll circle back to the startup visa, because that's what we're going to be primarily talking about. The self-employed persons program is a points-based program for athletes, people doing cultural type work. Those are things like in film, in writing, artists, etc. There's a minimum requirement of 2 years in those jobs. Intercompany transferee is primarily for the purpose of getting a work permit. It's for international companies to transfer their personnel from abroad to Canada. And usually that's for executives and managers and people in very specialized positions. Lastly, there's the provincial entrepreneur visa stream. So for example, in BC, where we are, there's the BC PMP entrepreneur stream. In the past, that's required a $200,000 investment and $600,000 of net worth, but that program is currently closed. So, we're kind of in a flux of post-COVID recovery. We're going to see a lot of changes to some of these immigration programs. And then the startup visa, which is what we're talking about today. So the reason why we're focusing on this particular program is because it's the most direct and fastest way for entrepreneurs to secure permanent status in Canada. And I'll get the next slide, please. So here we have the steps, but before I go there are some minimum requirements to the startup visa program. The first is to have a qualifying business. That means a business through which you get a letter of support from a designated organization. Those are venture capitalists, angel investors, business incubators, and Mira will be talking more about that process. In terms of ownership requirements, applicants are required to own majority share. So that means if you're by yourself, then you need to own at least 50% of the shares in the company, voting shares. There's a maximum of 5 applicants. So that means each applicant needs at least 10% shares, voting shares. The other minimum requirement is language. So that's English or French at a Canadian language benchmark 5. And lastly is to bring enough money to support yourself and your family when you immigrate to Canada. So, there's 2 parts to that. The first part is settlement funds. So for example, if you have 3 people in your family, including yourself, let's say it's you, a spouse, and a child, then for this year, the minimum amount is $20,371. So that doesn't seem like a lot of money. The second part to that is you'll need to have enough money to support your business. So then that depends on what sort of business you're doing, where it's operating, whether you have physical premises, whether you're sourcing inventory, things of that nature. So business specific things. And Mira will talk more about that later on as well. So in terms of the steps, how this program works with Tai Law, we've broken this up into a 7-step procedure. So the first 2 steps, basically building your innovative business idea and writing your business plan so you can present that to the designated organizations. That will be with Meryl, and we'll be involved in that process to address any immigration related issues that arise during that time. Step 3 is for you to take the language test. Usually that's English, it could be French. And then step 4 is to obtain your letter of support from the designated organization. Once you have that letter, you can apply for your work permit and for your permanent residence. Once you have your work permit, then you can come to Canada with your family. So for example, if you have a spouse, your spouse could also apply for an open work permit. If you have children, they can come to school here and enjoy our public school system. There's medical benefits, basically everything that, the coverage that you would need to live a life in Canada. And finally, the final step is to obtain your permanent residence and then to apply for citizenship later on. So the entire process can take roughly 2 to 3 years, depending on RSCC's processing times. Next slide, please. So just to recap a little bit for the Startup Visa program, the essential requirements are to have an innovative business idea, to hold majority share in the business, to meet the language benchmark, which is Canadian Language Benchmark 5, to have enough capital, and to get a letter of support that allows you to apply for your work permit and your permanent residency. And I'll get the next slide, please. So we offer eligibility checks and consultations, usually free of charge, for you to determine whether this program is suitable for you or there might be some other options. It's a complex road. There's so many different immigration programs out there, and it's our pleasure to help you guys, navigate that and figure out the best way. So I'll turn it over to Meryl and to speak about the business plan and the innovative business ideas.
Great, thank you, Stanley. So as Stanley has mentioned, thank you for everyone for coming out this evening. I know it's at 6 p.m. and it's not raining yet, so hopefully this time is worth your while. And as Stanley mentioned, I am going to focus primarily on the business aspect of the Startup Visa program. So if you could turn to the next slide, please. So really, when we're thinking about the Startup Visa program, the first step is identifying and honing in on your innovative idea. And with that comes your business plan. Business plans are really important. One thing that I want to emphasize is that it is a living document. So for any of you that have already had businesses or have started businesses or have gone to business school, you know how much work and you know how important it is for a business plan to exist in your business, because it is essentially it is laying the groundwork for your business. This piece of document, which we can help you with, really has 3 uses aside from allowing you to identify your business as a whole. One is for business loans, which I'll talk about later in my presentation, as well as the pitch deck, and more importantly, your application for the Startup Visa program. Next slide, please. So when we're thinking about the Startup Visa program, what we're really looking for is an idea that is essentially referred to as innovative. And the Canadian government has outlined 3 basic requirements that it has to be innovative, can create jobs for Canadians, and can compete on a global scale. Now, when we're thinking about the most important word in this particular slide, it is, what does innovative actually mean? So when we're thinking about innovative, it's not necessarily something that you are inventing from scratch. Innovation can actually be defined as either a change in a process. So let's say you have an existing business, or you have identified a more efficient way to achieve an outcome, that can be seen as innovative. Another way to define innovative is to solve a problem in a different way. So when we're thinking about this idea of innovation, most people think that they have to maybe create the next Facebook or maybe create the next TikTok. Really, the idea of innovation is a lot more simpler than that. With the startup visa program, you will need all three of these, all four of these requirements, which is your business plan, your pitch deck, which is a shortened version of your business plan, as well. For some instances of the programs you may be applying for, what is referred to as a minimum viable product and potentially market traction. And then lastly, this idea of a business that is essentially innovative, keeping in mind that innovative means a change in process or solving a problem in a different way. Next slide, please. So one aspect of getting a letter of support, which is essentially your entry into securing a work permit, there's really three roads that you can go down. One is incubators. So there's essentially 30 incubators for startups that are spread out across the country. Each of them have specific focuses. Some are in tech, healthcare, manufacturing, and some of them are focused on startups that have already been operating or have received market traction or have created their minimum viable product and generating revenue. And then there are some incubators where they are a little bit more lenient and they can accept your entity if it meets the basic requirements. So they focus primarily on the pre-revenue. Next slide, please. The other route that you could take is to secure funding from angel investors. Within the government of Canada, they have approved 9 angel investment groups where individuals who are accredited investors are allowed to join these groups. And to secure a letter of support from the government of Canada through this program, you need an investment of $75,000 into your venture. This requires slightly different parameters from the incubators. This will involve you pitching. This will involve you, directly talking to or being involved in securing investments from these accredited investors in these programs. Next slide, please. The last stage is venture capital. And for those of you that are involved in the startup space, you hear this word a lot. There's a lot more venture capital firms in Canada, but there's only about 25 that have been approved through the government of Canada where you can secure that letter of support. Typically, venture capital invest in startups, which this venture would qualify in, early stage or emerging companies. And keeping in mind that a lot of venture capitals have different investing mandates. They can invest either at the earliest stage of your company if you have this amazing innovative idea, or they can invest in later stages of the company. So there's not a one size fits all when it comes to venture capital. Now, with getting support from venture capital, you need to have a minimum of $200,000 investment to qualify for the startup visa program. And typically, you will find that you will also need to pitch and then also need a little bit more traction in your entity to be successful. Next slide, please. Now, when you're thinking about your business, let's say, as Stanley mentioned, a requirement of this is to have capital that you will be investing back into your entity. But there's also other sources of financing, which are bank loans. So Canada has essentially 5 big banks that all of you likely know now, given that you're all in Vancouver. And one interesting thing that banks also offer is the Canada Small Business Financing Program. This is actually offered and guaranteed by the federal government. So if you are needing any form of equipment, working capital, leasehold improvements, typically you have a little bit more of I say a better chance than a traditional business loan. Now, when you're looking at bank loans, bankers tend to look at it from a 3-to-1 ratio. So let's say you're looking for $300,000 to invest into your business. You need that capital to get your business off the ground. Banks generally like to see that you will invest and have capital of about $100,000 that you will invest into that business, and also an acceptable net worth after you have spent that $100,000. Obviously, banks have the lowest interest rates right now in the market. And the other source of financing, which comes next, is the Business Development Bank of Canada, which is the next tier. And the reason why BDC was created was because a lot of entrepreneurs were getting declined by banks because they're generally a lot more conservative. So with BDC, they fund startups. They generally also require a 3-to-1 ratio. So again, if you're asking for a $300,000 loan, you would need to invest about $100,000 into the business. However, BDC, because they are a little bit more easier and a little bit more lenient than the traditional banks, you're paying slightly higher interest rates. And then at the very last stage, you have alternative lenders where you are looking at rates from anywhere between 15 to 30% for a business loan, depending on your entity. Next slide, please. So obviously, as Stanley mentioned, we will help you with your business plan, honing in on your innovative idea, helping you create your pitch deck, and then also helping you apply for the applicable incubator groups.